Crawford Ashby announced the end of his marriage, not in a lawyer's office, not in private, but standing in the great room of the Ashby family estate, while his mother sat by the window like a woman watching a performance she had spent months choreographing. And the woman he had chosen to replace his wife smiled from the settee as if the house already owed her something. Naomi Reeves Ashby, 36-year-old wife of Crawford, and the woman who had spent the last 4 years quietly holding together a marriage that only one of them was still tending, stood near the fireplace, with her coat still buttoned because no one had offered to take it. Crawford Ashby, 40-year-old CEO and only heir of Ashby Development Group, held a sealed legal envelope in one hand. Helos Ashby, 66-year-old matriarch, and the woman who had spent the length of her son's marriage treating Naomi like an employee who had wandered into the wrong family portrait, stood just behind Crawford's shoulder with her hands clasped. Veronique Strand, 33, daughter of Atlanta's Strand investment family, and the woman Heloise had been positioning beside Crawford for most of the past year, sat in the chair nearest the fire as if warmth in that house already belonged to her. Crawford cleared his throat. "I want a divorce, Naomi." Naomi's voice came out quieter than she expected. "Why?" Before Crawford could form an answer, Heloise stepped forward with the patience of a woman who had been saving the sentence for a long time. "Because this family cannot afford sentimentality. Crawford needs a partner who brings something real to the table. Veronique's family has the capital and the connections you have never had." Naomi looked at Crawford. "Is that what you believe?" He looked at the floor. Then he said, "Mother is right." That was the moment Naomi understood the full shape of what had happened. Crawford had not simply chosen another woman. He had handed the marriage to his mother like an underperforming contract and let her terminate it. Veronique set a small velvet box on the side table. Her smile was gracious, which made it worse. "You should leave with your dignity intact," she said. "Crawford has made his choice." Naomi did not beg. She did not raise her voice. She took the envelope from Crawford's hand. Because Crawford did not know the truth. He did not know that Naomi controlled Reeves Hartley Capital through the Hartley Foundation Trust, established by her late father Solomon Reeves, a self-made real estate investor who had spent his life buying distressed properties and restoring them without displacing the people inside. He did not know that Reeves Hartley was the private equity group already in final negotiations to acquire and restructure Ashby Development Group before the company's debt covenants forced a bank-ordered liquidation. He did not know that the woman his mother called inadequate had been quietly protecting his family's company for 6 months through a team of attorneys, auditors, and a confidential acquisition process that Ashby's own board had initiated without telling him the name of the buyer. He believed the divorce would free him. What it would actually do was remove him from the last protection he had ever had. 3 days later, after Crawford signed a separation agreement waiving all claims to trust-held assets without reading the clause carefully, the way he had never read anything, Naomi handed him carefully. He walked into a board meeting expecting to announce his future. Naomi walked in first. Before he could thank his new investors, she said, "You should know who owns them. Some betrayals do not break the quiet person immediately. They wake up the part of her that was patient and prepared and waiting for the right room to tell the truth." 2 weeks before that room, the foundation crack ran along the east retaining wall of Ashby Development's unfinished Crestview Commons project like a signature on a bad contract. Naomi saw it before the site foreman said anything. She was standing on the muddy perimeter in a plain coat with a clipboard that listed no official department because nobody on the crew knew her as anything other than Crawford's quiet wife, who showed up sometimes when he was too busy. Winston Prater, 57-year-old operations director at Ashby Development, and the one man in the company who cared more about the buildings than the brand, jogged toward her with dust on his hard hat and worry pulling at the corners of his mouth. "That crack wasn't there Tuesday," he said. "I know," Naomi said. "The soil compaction report from March flagged this section. The subcontractor cut corners on the concrete pour." Winston studied her. "How do you know about the March report?" Naomi looked at the wall. "I read things people leave on Crawford's desk." That was not the whole truth. The whole truth was that Naomi had read the same report in a confidential due diligence file sent to her by Amos Fitch, 50-year-old corporate attorney, and the one person outside her private board who knew both versions of her life. Naomi Reeves Ashby, overlooked wife, and Naomi Reeves, controlling beneficial owner of Reeves Hartley Capital. She had built Reeves Hartley quietly after her father's death, the same way Solomon had built everything, without announcement, without performance, by learning every detail of the thing she was trying to save, before she touched it. Solomon had walked her through one of his first renovated buildings when she was 19 and pointed not at the sign above the entrance, but at the people moving through the lobby. "The address doesn't matter," he had said. "What matters is what happens to the people inside." That lesson had followed her into marriage. It had followed her into the Ashby Development acquisition file. Ashby Development was bleeding out. Crawford's push into luxury high-rise construction had overextended the company's credit by 18 months. 3 missed milestones on the Crestview project had triggered penalty clauses with 2 major contractors. The bank had issued a quiet default notice that Crawford had not shown his own board, and Monroe Strand, 61-year-old founder of Stratford Equity and Veronique's father, had submitted a term sheet offering emergency bridge financing that looked like rescue and read like a takeover. Naomi had reviewed Monroe's term sheet at midnight. The interest rate was predatory. The repayment schedule was accelerated. The covenant package included control rights over project assets, construction contracts, and any change of ownership if Ashby missed a single payment. It was not financing. It was acquisition by installments, timed for a moment when Crawford was too proud and too desperate to read the fine print. Reeves Hartley had submitted a competing rescue offer through the independent committee that Ashby's outside counsel had quietly convened. The offer was clean, fully capitalized, structured to protect the workforce. But the process required confidentiality, a conflict review, and Naomi's formal disclosure of beneficial ownership before the final vote. She could not name herself yet. She looked up at the cracked wall. How long before it fails completely? Winston followed her eyes toward the office windows above the site. The blinds were closed. Depends on whether anyone upstairs is ready to hear the truth. Crawford was on the phone arguing with a contractor he could not pay when she opened his office door. He covered a stack of papers with his forearm when he heard her step. She could see the corner of a default notice, the Stratford Equity letterhead. "How bad is it?" she asked. He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It's development, Naomi. There are cash flow cycles. You don't need to worry about things you don't understand." The words were light. The cut was not. She had heard that sentence in a dozen different forms across 4 years. In board meetings she wasn't invited to. At dinners where Helois redirected every conversation away from her. During arguments, Crawford ended by asking her to trust him. She looked at the Stratford letterhead. "If you're considering outside financing, you need general counsel to review every covenant before you sign. The default triggers are not standard." Crawford's jaw tightened. "I heard one name on one envelope, and now you have opinions." "I have read the document," she said. He looked away. "Mother is bringing people who actually understand this industry. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be." Her phone vibrated, Amos from his private line. She stepped into the hallway. His voice was low. "The independent committee has reviewed the Reeves-Hartley offer. We're cleared to move toward closing, but your ownership disclosure has to happen at the formal board session. If Crawford learns before the meeting, he may try to block the process on personal grounds." Naomi looked through the glass at Crawford, standing alone behind his desk, rubbing his temple with 2 fingers, looking like a man calculating how much time he had left. "Not yet," she said. "Keep the process clean." A pause. Then Amos said, "Naomi, you are trying to save a man who doesn't know you're the one holding the rope." Her throat tightened. She thought of Solomon's attorney, that first week after the funeral, telling her, "Do what your father would do. Find something worth saving and save it quietly." She had found Crawford, then she had found his company. "Move the process forward," she said, "but let the conflict review finish." She found out about Veronique on a Wednesday evening, through a door that was almost closed. Crawford's voice came through the gap, low and deliberate, not arguing but planning. "She doesn't suspect anything," he said. Then after a pause, "Mother's right. I've waited too long because I felt guilty. I'm not going to feel guilty anymore." Naomi stood in the hallway in the dark for a long time after the call ended. The following Friday, Helois hosted what she called a family dinner. Naomi arrived 20 minutes late because she had been on a call with Amos reviewing evidence that Ramsey Cole, 43-year-old private investigator and Amos's corporate due diligence specialist, had assembled on Stratford Equity's conduct. She entered through the side hall, heard voices from the sitting room, and opened the door. Crawford stood near the bookshelf. Veronique was beside him with one hand resting on his arm. He did not move away. Helois stood at the window with her arms crossed and the expression of someone watching the conclusion of a plan she had authored. Monroe Strand stood near the bar cart, silent, watching. He did not look surprised. That told Naomi everything she needed to know about how long this had been arranged. Nobody spoke for 4 seconds. Heloise said, "Well, perhaps this saves everyone a long conversation." Naomi set her bag on the chair by the door. "Let me understand this clearly." She looked at Veronique. "You were introduced as an investor contact." She looked at Heloise. "You brought her here as a replacement." She looked at Crawford. "And you let both happen." Crawford went red. He reached for anger the way he always did when shame was available. "Veronique understands what this family needs." "What does this family need?" Naomi asked. Heloise answered. "A woman with capital and standing. A woman who belongs in the rooms where decisions are made." Her voice carried no cruelty, which made it more precise. She had practiced this. She had built this evening piece by piece until even the ending sounded like sound judgment. Naomi looked at Monroe. He was not surprised. This was not romance, this was architecture. Then Heloise reached to the side table and lifted a sealed envelope. Divorce papers, not a conversation, not a confession. A prepared exit, ready before tonight, ready while Naomi had been reviewing covenants and trying to find a way to save the thing these people were happy to dismantle. "Monroe's team can finalize the transition," Heloise said calmly. "Veronique's family brings what Ashby Development needs." Crawford finally looked at Naomi. "I stopped believing love was enough. I need something real." She had given him the most real thing she had. She had stayed through the first failed project, through the years when payroll was tight, and Heloise blamed Naomi for not bringing more to the table. She had protected workers whose names Crawford did not know. She had hidden her own power because she wanted his love to exist without the weight of her money pressing on it. He had not been waiting for something real. He had been waiting for permission to leave. Naomi picked up the divorce packet. She did not scream. She did not beg. She walked into the rain outside and sat in her car and called Amos from the dark. "He served me papers in front of her," she said. Amos was quiet then. "Do you want me to pause the acquisition?" Naomi looked back at the lit windows of the house where her marriage had just been processed like a closing document. "No," she said. "Move forward, exactly as planned." She signed the separation agreement 4 days later, across a polished conference table from Crawford, his attorney Aldrich Sohn, Heloise, and Veronique, who had arrived uninvited and sat beside Crawford like a woman already taking measurements. Aldrich placed the papers in front of Naomi without fully meeting her eyes. "The agreement is straightforward. Mr. Ashby wants this handled with respect." Naomi looked at Crawford. "Then why bring the woman you've been seeing?" The room went still. Even Aldrich stopped moving his pen. Crawford's face darkened. "Don't make this something it isn't." "I'm not the one who did that," Naomi said. Heloise leaned forward. "You are leaving with more than you arrived with. A little gratitude would suit you." Naomi turned to her slowly. "You have never known what I arrived with." For the first time in 4 years, Heloise had no immediate answer. Amos slid the signature page toward Naomi and touched one clause with his finger. "This confirms separation of personal, premarital, and trust-held assets. Once signed, neither party can claim surprise. Their disclosures are attached. Ours are legally sufficient." Her hand trembled slightly as she picked up the pen, not from fear, from the grief of signing away the last version of a man she had believed in. She signed. Crawford signed after her with visible relief. Veronique smiled like someone watching the right curtain fall. Heloise settled back, satisfied. Then Amos's phone lit on the table. A message from Ramsey. Stratford made unauthorized approach to 2 board members before disclosure completed. Full record attached. Naomi's hands stopped trembling. The boardroom on the 14th floor had been dressed for celebration. Fresh water carafes. Name, placards. A photographer Heloise had arranged stood near the back wall with his camera ready for a moment that had not arrived yet. Crawford sat near the head of the table in the suit he wore when he wanted to look like authority. Veronique sat beside him in ivory, composed in the way of people who have rehearsed inevitability. Heloise sat behind Crawford's left shoulder. Monroe Strand opened his Stratford equity binder like a man expecting to countersign a completed transaction. Winston sat stiffly in his work jacket in the operations chair. He had been asked by the independent committee to attend as witness to the company's ground-level condition. He had not slept the night before. Prentice Hale, 70-year-old independent chairman of the Ashby Development Board, sat at the center of the long table with his hands folded and his expression giving nothing away. Beside him sat Cecily Barrow, 54, outside counsel for the company during the acquisition review. 2 auditors with sealed binders sat near the wall. Crawford had asked Prentice before the meeting why so many legal people were present. Prentice had said, "Final acquisitions require final clarity." At the time it had sounded procedural. The boardroom door opened. Naomi walked in. Amos entered behind her and placed his briefcase on the table. Ramsay followed with a sealed evidence case. Heloise rose halfway from her chair. This is a closed session. Veronique gave a small, controlled laugh. This isn't the place for personal matters, Naomi. Naomi did not look at either of them. She looked at Prentice. Prentice stood. Mrs. Reeves is here by right. He opened the folder in front of him and read in a formal voice. Naomi Reeves Ashby is the controlling beneficial owner of Reeves Hartley Capital, the acquiring entity selected by the independent committee to purchase and stabilize Ashby Development Group, subject to board approval today. Crawford's mouth opened. No sound came out. Heloise gripped the table edge. Veronique's smile disappeared so completely it looked like a power outage. For the first time that room saw Naomi, without the frame Heloise had built around her. Not the quiet wife who did not understand business, not the woman who could be seated near walls, not the person Crawford had described to Veronique as someone who would walk away without a fight. She stood in the boardroom, like she had always belonged there, because she had been running the process that would decide everyone in that room's future for the past 6 months. Crawford stared at her, and memories struck him one by one. Naomi asking about the contractor penalty clauses, Naomi warning him about the Stratford covenants, Naomi noticing the default notice before he hid it. His own voice, returning to him now with a particular weight. It's development, Naomi. You don't need to worry about things you don't understand. Every memory now stood in the room like a witness. Munro closed his binder slowly. His expression had shifted from rescuer to man counting exits. Heloise found her voice first. If she owned anything significant, Crawford would have known. Naomi looked at her. No, Heloise, Crawford would have had to ask. The air in the room changed. Cecily confirmed the ownership records. Reeves Hartley Capital is held through the Hartley Foundation Trust established prior to the marriage. The separation agreement signed Monday confirms Mr. Ashby holds no claim over trust-held assets. Crawford flinched. The divorce he believed had freed him had locked him out of everything. Naomi took the chair reserved for Reeves Hartley's representative. She did not rush. She opened the folder in front of her and looked across the table at Crawford. Before you thank your investors, you should know who owns them. She opened the second folder. Please open your packets. Nobody moved at first, then Winston opened his, then Prentice, then the others, one by one. Crawford looked down at the first page, his name at the top, the acquisition authority below it, and a sealed section marked Conflict Review. Munro Strand, Veronique Strand, Crawford Ashby. His voice when it came was barely audible. You bought my family's company? Naomi looked at him across the table. Her face was steady, but her eyes were not. No, Crawford, she said. I saved your family's company. She opened the evidence section, but first we need to discuss who almost destroyed it. Amos walked through the records steadily, without performance. Stratford Equity had made unauthorized contact with 2 board members before the conflict disclosure had been completed. An attempt to influence the vote before the independent process concluded. Munro had received internal financial data from Heloise, including default notice dates and contractor penalty structures, before Stratford's official proposal. Veronique had been cultivating a personal relationship with Crawford while her father's company sought a controlling position in the company Crawford managed. Crawford had entered preliminary discussions with Stratford without disclosing the personal relationship to his own board. Ramsay placed one final document in front of Prentice, a message from Veronique to Munro, recovered during the formal document review. Prentice read it aloud. Once Crawford is settled, the mother will manage him. The wife is quiet. She'll walk away without a fight. The room went cold. Munro stood. Stratford Equity will withdraw from. Cecily interrupted him. Stratford's proposal is rejected. All further contact will proceed through outside counsel. Any attempt to interfere with the approved acquisition process will be entered into the corporate record. Munro sat back down. There was nothing left to perform. Veronique reached for his arm. Munro did not take her hand. The moment the plan failed, loyalty became a cost he was no longer paying. She understood that from his face. She let go. Prentice cleared his throat. The independent committee recommends approval of the Reeves Hartley acquisition plan. Crawford looked up. What does that mean for my role? Naomi opened the final section. Your executive authority over transition matters is suspended pending the conflict disclosure review. Stratford Equity's proposal is voided and excluded from all future acquisition discussions. Munro Strand's access to internal company communications is terminated immediately. Veronique Strand's involvement will be entered into the permanent corporate record. A pause. Heloise Ashby is removed from all informal advisory roles and barred from internal access for the duration of the review period. Heloise's hands, folded on the table in a white blazer she had chosen for photographs, began to shake. She had arrived expecting to be captured beside her son's victory. Now she looked like a woman wearing the wrong dress to a reckoning. Naomi's voice softened only once. Winston Prater will oversee field operations during the first restructuring phase, reporting directly to the transition committee. No workers will be terminated during the first stage acquisition. Winston lowered his head. He made no sound, but his shoulders shook once. Across the building, Cynthia Boone, 58-year-old site supervisor, who had spent 23 years working her way from labor crew to foreman, covered her mouth when Winston told her. She had a daughter finishing her last semester of nursing school. She had been doing the math every week for months. She did not cheer when she heard the news. She simply closed her eyes and breathed. In the hallway outside the boardroom, Crawford caught up to Veronique before she reached the elevator. "We can fix this," he said. She looked at him with an expression that was not cruel, simply finished. "You told me she was nothing," she said. "You told me the company was yours to give." Crawford's mouth opened. "I need alignment with something real, Crawford, not liability." She walked toward the elevator where Monroe was already waiting. Monroe did not hold the door. Crawford stood in the hallway alone. Heloise sat on a bench near the window, turning her bracelet around her wrist. The photographer Nora had hired, Heloise had hired, stood near the wall with the camera lowered, uncertain whether to leave or stay. Crawford went back into the boardroom. Naomi was talking with Winston near the far window. Amma stood beside her. The folders were closed. The war inside the room was over, but the weight of it had not fully lifted. Crawford walked toward her. He did not know how to begin, so he asked the only question that mattered to him now. "Was any of it real?" Naomi turned. For the first time all morning, the steadiness in her face cracked, just slightly, not enough for tears. Just enough for him to see what was underneath the calm. "Yes," she said, "that was the tragedy. I made a mistake." She looked at him for a long moment. "A mistake is missing an appointment. You built a life where everyone in it had a voice except your wife." He had nothing to answer that with. Everything he had lost was visible from where he stood. His executive title, his mother's certainty, Veronique, the board's confidence, the belief that he had understood something Naomi had not. All of it had dissolved in one morning. "I'm sorry," he said. She reached into her coat pocket and placed something on the conference table between them, her wedding ring. He stared at it. "I love the man who gave me this," she said. "I don't know the man who made me prove what I was worth in front of strangers." She did not pick it up. She did not wait for him to speak. She walked out of the boardroom and down the hall toward the glass windows overlooking the Crestview Commons site. The project cranes were still. The crew had gathered in the staging area below, waiting. Nobody down there knew yet what the morning had decided for their paychecks, their health insurance, their children's tuitions, their sick spouses, the small and irreplaceable economies of their lives. Winston appeared beside her. "They need to hear it from you." She nodded. She would go down. She would tell them the project would be completed correctly, with the right subcontractor on the east wall, with the right pour, with inspections done properly this time. She would tell them payroll was secured. She would tell them nobody was losing a job. Cynthia looked up from the staging area and found Naomi's face through the glass. She raised one hand slowly. Naomi raised hers back. Behind her, through the boardroom glass, Crawford watched the woman he had most consistently underestimated become the woman who had saved everything he lost. Naomi took the elevator to the ground floor. She walked through the lobby and out through the front doors into the Atlanta morning. The air was cool. The light was sharp and honest. She did not look back at the building. Not because she hated what was behind her, because for the first time in 4 years, she was not carrying anyone else's pride out the door with her. Her father's voice found her one last time, clear and unhurried as it always was. "The address doesn't matter. What matters is what happens to the people inside." She had taken care of the people inside. The rest would follow.